Okay. Do you mind, first of all, just saying and spelling your name?
My name is Paul Raushenbush, Raushenbush.
Great. And to get us started, can you just give me an autobiographical sketch, who you are, where you're from, what you've done, what you're doing now? And you can be as elaborate or not as you like.
Okay. I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. My father, Walter Raushenbush, was a law professor. My mother was an artist and homemaker. She and he, it was one of four kids. We were basically a pretty middle-class family with, very high academic, a lot of intellectualism. My father's family was very connected with the Wisconsin experiment, and both of his parents had been professors at the university and also worked closely with the La Follette family and the progressivism of that time. And then my grandmother was the daughter of Louis Brandeis, and my grandfather was the daughter of Walter Raushenbush. So they both come with this kind of loaded progressivism. Studied religion in college, was also a heavy stoner, and went off, had a record company in Barcelona, then came back and kind of decided that, my rock and roll lifestyle had kind of taken over, and so decided to do recovery from alcohol and drugs, and started to pray again, went back to church when I moved to New York, to kind of this radical, amazing Baptist church in the village called Judson Memorial Church. And the pastor there urged me to look at Union Seminary, and I went up there and kind of knew immediately that was the right place for me, and studied there, looking at the arts and religion. And there I decided, well, the craziest thing I could do would be work in a Baptist church. I worked in a Baptist church and actually decided that maybe I would, really felt called to that work, and so was ordained as a pastor. And moving forward, I've worked with street kids in Seattle, a lot of LGBT kids. I've worked in churches. I worked in Brazil with drug addicts, and have worked on kind of balanced an interest in journalism with pastoral. So I was doing both at the same time. I worked at BeliefNet, which was the first major interfaith website, and then was also working at Columbia and working at the Riverside Church, and went to Princeton for 8 years, was the Associate Dean of Religious Life there. About 6 years into that, I reached out I had been working on a progressive religion politics blog at BeliefNet, and then reached out to Arianna Huffington about doing religion for her at the Huffington Post. So my last 2 years at Princeton, I held both positions as the religion editor at Huffington, and then at Princeton, and then now have moved full-time to the senior religion editor position at Huffington Post. I have a wonderful partner named Brad Gooch, who is a writer, and we live here in Manhattan, and I'm very close to my family.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, great. So we will kind of reapproach the present in a minute. But first, let's go back. I just want to touch on a couple of things. First of all, that's kind of a heavy pedigree that you have. And I'm curious what your own coming to consciousness was about that. Like, at what point did you realize that who Louis Brandeis was, and that you were related to him, and what that might mean?
Yeah.
Was that like something that was kind of...
Well, that's the advantage of growing up in the Midwest, in some ways, is that Madison is, my cousins on the Brandeis side, who I'm closest with, they're my closest cousins, they grew up in D.C. They went to Sidwell Friends. They had and so it was very conscious for them. We were it was much less conscious for us. We knew, and I should say my parents were amazing about never putting burdens of that sort upon us. My sister is a yoga instructor and has her own yoga studio. My brother and sister were attorneys, and I became a clergy. They wanted us to have successful lives, but my father actually is, kind of, if you think about what it might have felt like to me, my father had these two grandparents, and everybody said to him, well, you have to do something really amazing. And he just told me once in a story, he said, I just decided I was not going to take that advice, and I was going to do exactly what I wanted to do, which was to be a law professor in Madison, Wisconsin. And, he had a very successful career for what he was. But so he kind of set the standard. He was like, I'm not, but it's for these two figures, for many people, are completely iconic. And so they're very there's some, which comes with, there's nowhere to go but down in some ways, but fortunately, it's been, if you have to weigh it, of course, it's a blessing. My full name is Paul Brandeis Raushenbush, and that's, the name I use for journalism now, and which is conscious. I try to, but then I've also had, I spoke at Chautauqua a couple of years ago, and I was talking about my family history a little bit, not much, but with my dad, actually. We were re-releasing the 100th anniversary of my great-grandfather's book, Christianity and the Social Crisis, and this woman comes up to me afterwards, clearly Jewish, and she just says, I can't believe a Brandeis is a pastor. Your great-grandfather would be rolling in his grave. And which is kind of funny, because my great-grandfather was very happy that my grandmother was marrying Walter Raushenbush's son. Mm-hmm. So, in that family, the religion, in some ways, was progressivism.
Right.
We still, my family owns the Brandeis' summer home, and there's no Judaica in it. That's not, he was interested in the Jewish people and became eventually interested in Israel. But it wasn't like he was this big Jew and, the tragedy of my daughter marrying this guy, there was none of that, and so but for people who kind of place something upon him, but for the most part, it's a great blessing. Mm-hmm. And I love the history, and I'm learning more about the history. And one of my projects over the years, in the coming years, is going to be to really delve deeper, because it's interesting. I was talking, because my cousin, was Richard Rorty, who's another, major figure in philosophy, and I was talking to his son, and I was saying, I don't really understand your father's philosophy. I haven't really dug into it the way I should, the way one would think I would. Mm-hmm. And my cousin admitted that he had also, not really understood. And I think similarly, there was a big Brandeis biography that came out last year, and my cousins and I have not read it. And, I met with Ruth Messenger yesterday. She said, last summer I, took all this time to read the biography. I was kind of hemming and hawing and going, oh, yes, it's big. Because I certainly have a copy, but I don't. It's a very big biography. So, the biographies, I've done a little bit more research on Raushenbush, and I feel like I actually have a handle on him. Mm-hmm. Because I'm more familiar with the kind of work he does, and it pertains a little bit more to me. But I still have a lot of research to do, because there's a ton of interesting people that are also connected to the family in interesting ways, and so that's a project for me in the coming years.
Uh-huh. One of the things you said was that so your rock and roll years, let us call them that, were in the 70s?
No. The rock and roll years were it was the 80s. basically. You know, I mean, I was interested in rock and roll in college, you know, listening to music. And I mean, rock and roll years is just, you know, an euphemism for drug addiction.
Right.
But, you know, but it's not, you know, and believe me, like, it's basically I had no rock talent. I was very interested in listening to music, and so like I thought, well, this is an easy route.
Well, one of the things that struck me about it was in talking about your addiction, and then you said, you know, that you started praying again, and I wondered kind of what lies behind that phrase, praying again. Can you talk about your relationship to religion, kind of over the long span of your life?
Thank you for bringing that out. It's you know, we were asked to go to church. My mother, interestingly, I mean, it was just slightly sidetracking. My father was raised in the Unitarian Church, and he quickly realized that was not for him. And so my father is a pretty committed agnostic, still is, if he's honest. He is honest. But my mother was a conservative Presbyterian. I asked my dad if he'd ever had a religious experience, and he said the only thing that comes close to being able to call it that was when I first saw your mother and knew I wanted to marry her, and he did, you know, quite quickly afterwards, And my mother was a fairly conservative Presbyterian at the time. During her lifetime, she became like a wackadoodle, and, you know, was taking peyote in the jungles of Peru. And by the end of it, you know, I mean, you know, she just had a big opening of her mind and spirit. But at the time, she thought, she was like, I want to be your wife for all of this life and the next life. And so she asked my dad to get baptized, and my dad was like, I don't believe any of it. You know, I mean, I think that I'm sure he didn't say that vocally, but, you know, that's my guess, is that, you know, he was like, you know, I love you. That's the thing I know, and whatever you want to do. So he became very active in the church, and we went to church, and we had to go through confirmation. My brother, who was, you know, total, you know, straight A student, went to Harvard. You know, he of course did everything right, and then went through confirmation and decided not to get confirmed because he didn't want to. I, on the other hand, skipped confirmation, you know, while lying to my parents, and then was told I couldn't get confirmed, and then decided to, like, actually pursue it on my own. I did, you know, and was confirmed, got involved in the church, you know, was, you know, kind of had some, like, spiritual feelings, was interested. I wasn't a super pious kid. I don't want to, you know, it wasn't like I was up here and then I fell away from the church. But, you know, a big part of AA is starting to pray. I mean, that's like, you know, whatever that looks like to you. And so there's a kind of a great story that I have used in sermons where I was in the halfway house in South Boston, pretty rough, you know, we're a pretty rough crowd. And this old Irish Catholic woman who was, you know, drunk herself, ex-drunk, she put, you know, my shoes under my bed all the time. Finally, I said, you know, Marilyn, why are you doing this? And she said, because I want you on your knees. And you know, it was good enough for me to remember it, like, 22 years later. And so that, you know, that started it. And then, you know, I always had a pull towards it. Even when I was in college, I was interested in the church and in religion. You know, I studied it, but it was kind of, at that time, my line was, I'm studying religion because I don't want to study anything that anybody would expect me to get a job with. That's one of those divine comedies where all of a sudden then my life is...
and now here you are.
And now here I am.
So at what point did that become clear to you? At what point did it become clear to you that religion actually might turn out to be something that would become such a part of your life that it would be... Well, you know,
for me, you know... I was very interested in theater. I was very interested in dance. I had seen, and I realized, like, the things that were attracting me to religion were the same things that were attracting me to those kind of artistic endeavors.
Well, you know, I interviewed a year or so ago a rabbi here in New York who also came out of theater, and he talked about the close relationship between theater and liturgy.
Absolutely, but not just liturgy. I mean, that for sure. Bill T. Jones has a great line, like, for me, dance does what religion does for other people. It makes sense of this world, and in all of its complexity and all of its tragedy, and for me, seeing Bill T. Jones the year perform, not knowing who he was, but just being invited to go see him, and just seeing it on stage, I was just like, it's transformative. And then, for me, like going through seminary and realizing that kind of intimate interaction between people trying to understand what this life is about and how it is affected by this kind of transcendent yearning, and all of that, has been part of my effort. And I got ordained in some ways, like I'm from a tradition. Back to Dick Rorty, who I interviewed. I just went out to Stanford the 6 months before he died, and I was talking to him, and among many other things that were said, he just said, "I'm not really so much anti-religious as anti-clerical." And in some ways I feel that way too. Like, for me to be a minister is somewhat distasteful, but Baptists shouldn't really even have ministers. It's like a radically democratic idea. But the idea of working in ultimate values, as Tillich called religion, or God, dealing with these things that matter to people so much. And it's a very intimate profession. Mm-hmm. And very honorific, because people invite you into these moments that are so fraught and so loaded, both with joy and with tragedy or sorrow. So I didn't. Again, I'm not one of these people who said, "Well, God told me to." I've had moments of clarity, like walking into Union Seminary. I actually had a moment of clarity, and I can count the moments of clarity I've had in 5 on one hand. It was very clear to me what I needed to do, and that doesn't happen to me almost ever. So I've had moments of clarity, but so to spend my life talking to people about ultimate concerns is a great way to live.
Yeah. Has the social justice piece of it always been there for you? Like, are those two things kind of so braided together that they're inseparable, or are they kind of distinct in a certain way?
It's a really provocative question. I'll quote my teachers. I interviewed Bill Coffin right before he died, and he said ethics do not exhaust the gospel, but they are not ancillary. So there are times when you can talk about religion and spirituality with someone who has been told that they have cancer, or where there's a social justice element to it, but it's not really the primary concern. But then I think the question that has to haunt everyone is, like, what do we do with people suffering just because of injustice? Like, how do we force ourselves to be confronted with that on a daily basis? And if we're not doing that, then the religion is not actually what its founder meant, at least as far as Christianity. I would say most religions, but also it's kind of a very self-indulgent project. So social justice, but I also unfortunately, a lot of times I sense a laziness around. This gets into my work here a little bit. It's like when I first started it, everybody was like, "Awesome, Huffington Post, religion," and they would send in purely political posts. And then kind of I joke, because Jesus said we should love everybody. That's like the end. So I was joking, like we were just, politics plus Jesus. And And I don't find that fulfilling either. Like, I think it has to come, if you're going to talk about religion and politics, you should be grounded it should emanate out of the richness. It shouldn't be, it should emanate out of the reality of the gospel rather than something where you're trying to superimpose or glue the gospel onto something that really is not. So, and that's what I think gave kind of the social gospel its vitality. It wasn't like people who felt like it was manipulating. It was really just like people. Hey, that's the reason I kind of like working with these new evangelicals, because it's like they're there with Jesus already, But then they're just having these eyes open, say, "Holy, I got to do something because Jesus is telling me." This is what I have to do. And it's very exciting because they have zeal, and it's all wrapped up in a sense of, redemption, which I think are words that are strong if used the correct way. And I think the same is true for Jews who like kind of sense it, and Muslims. So but coming out of my own tradition, it's kind of fun to work with, because I actually think they're more akin to what Raushenbush was feeling, who had this kind of second experience. He was, just this awakening as he came. So it's for me they're very interlinked, but I like to kind of think that it comes out of a religious awakening, rather than kind of like, how can I get the gospel to fit into this policy statement, which is so I work with this a lot, and I'm always like telling my bloggers, can you make this more religion-y, or like can you, or like if it's a new blogger who like, because people think the Huffington Post, I should tone it down, or I should make it, I should do a certain. I'm like, put more scripture into it, put more of the Bible into it. Like I got this like pretty conservative pastor out in Phoenix. I got the post yesterday. And he had this really important post called All-Star Shame, because the sheriff in Phoenix dresses his chain gangs in pink, and to feminize them and to shame them. And he was going to intentionally have them work right next to the All-Star game that was happening yesterday.
Just so that an extra couple,
so that more people could
see them.
Yes, it would see them, and they would feel more shame. And they would be publicly humiliated more. First of all, chain gang, but and 110-degree heat, et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote something that was good, but it was like, you're an evangelical pastor, and yet you don't talk about God or Jesus at all in this. Bring it on, buddy. Convince the Christians who are walking by kind of eating their popcorn that this is something they have to deal with. And so that's kind of my role, is like to really say, like, don't be shy. We have to battle this out using the authenticity of what we're doing.
So now you've been involved in a really serious way in religion for a couple of decades-ish, 20 years, 20 more.
I would say, well, what's really serious? But I would say. Yeah, close to that. Yeah. That's...
Is your sense that... I don't know how to ask this. How do you see religion in American life? And how has it changed or not in the time that you've been really... Because one of the things, for someone whose attention is more on the secular side of things, it's easy to feel as though religion has come to hold a different place in American life than it did when we were younger. I don't know if that's true or not, but just the number of things, both left and right, that are being done in the name of somebody's religion just seems like it's been notched up a little bit from where it was in the mid 20th century.
Well, certainly it has been. And there's some one way to think about that is like the immigration law of 1965. We have a lot more Muslims. We have a lot more Hindus. We have a lot more other things, other people coming into our country, and so the fact that, we have more brown people and, and in this, and post 9/11 Muslims, really does play into the way we understand religion. And then it was brought into huge relief with 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
But, all of a sudden, there are more mosques, there are more temples, so I'm talking about kind of a new influx of, religions from the East that were not here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And of course, the 80s were very much about the ascendant power of the religious right. To my recollection, it was like kind of like, oh wow, they got, all of a sudden they were like, all right, let's make this happen, and so we started hearing a lot more about them,
Mm-hmm.
And the descendant power of the mainstream,
Mm-hmm.
which had always been there. It's the power of the mainstream churches to change, the civil rights movement, and so it's just that in some ways it became a little. It seemed like it was a distinct identity.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, we are evangelicals, we are Muslims, we are, I don't know, so I don't know if it's more or less now. It certainly is that, true that I think especially in regards to Islam. That's like the thing that's changed.
Mm-hmm.
My dad admitted he didn't vote for Kennedy the first time because of the Catholic issue. That was real. It's real today.
Mm-hmm.
But it's real today, but we all acknowledge it's real today. But it was real back then.
Uh-huh.
It just had different ways of being talked about, but
Right.
It was real,
Yeah. So maybe it's just that religion doesn't hold a different place in American life, but it holds a different place in American public language.
I think so. I think people are, but it's also that I think historians maybe have not really unpacked religion in the mid-20th century the way it's being kind of eagerly unpacked now.
Mm-hmm.
Again, my father's a good case in point. He didn't vote for a Democrat because of a religious affiliation. That's a huge statement.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that religion played a really.
Well, it also means he voted for Nixon.
Well, he may have. Which is again shocking if he did. But which I think he did. So anyway, I'm curious about that. I'm not sure. I'm not enough of a historian, but at the same time, so religion is playing all sorts of different roles, and and I would say one of the interesting ways religion is, it's in some ways we're almost that's not true, but we're like there's a. People have begun to, we've had this extreme sort of reaction to Islam. We also have a lot of people in some ways, whose religion has become the interfaith movement. And who have really, it used to be, I think until very recently, maybe the 90s or even maybe post 9/11. It used to be that interfaith work was very sort of, and then we should be nice to the Jews, there's been Jewish-Christian dialogue for a long time, and but since 9/11 and since this sense of urgency around religion being a bomb. You've had a lot of leaders who have been, like Eva Patel and other people who have been lifted up, who all they're doing is interfaith. Mm-hmm. And many Christians now think if interfaith isn't kind of the first thing you're doing, you're really you shouldn't be doing religion at all. Which is very odd for other Christians who are like, that's not at all what you should be doing. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, it's an interesting phenomenon. But the primary, these violent acts in the name of religion, specifically in the name of religion, that it would happen with Islam. I mean, there have been many other violent acts by religious people, but made people very freaked out. I mean, we have the Crusades history, so it's not like it's a new thing, but it was a very interesting kind of wake-up call that, religion is not dead. It's going on very strong. Global Christianity in the South is huge. And Michelle Bachmann is a viable candidate.
Well, that, I guess,
and she's a viable candidate because she is the evangelical candidate now, and that's a huge proportion of our population. And someone asked me who's going to be the Republican. I think she has a shot. Even though now it seems like, people are beginning to tear at the edges, and she's going to have a hard time dealing with all of that. But
I think the scrutiny is going to get hard.
The scrutiny is going to get really rough. But if you think for the 30%, for a lot of the country, the fact that her husband, who, by the way, every gay person I've ever talked to, which is in the last 24 hours because I didn't know he existed before then, who has seen this guy or listened to him thinks he's gay. So, it's very funny. Because yesterday I was like, because I was really like, the pray away the gay thing, and this is totally tangential. But, it's like one of these things where I was just like, and then I heard him talk, and then I saw him act, and I was like, wait a second. This guy's totally gay. Mm-hmm. And, and he said something like, we all, we feel these desires, but we don't need to go down that path. I'm like, no. Sweetie, straight people actually don't feel those desires. That means you're gay. You don't have to act on it. It's totally cool. I don't care if you ever do. In fact, that's fine if you don't. But, you just need to know that not every straight man feels homosexual desire. So, so anyway, that's very tangential. But
it's not tangential at all, actually, because, one of the things that I'm trying to tease out is this current moment in America, and I want to talk about that phrase, this current moment. What does that mean to you? But one way of asking the question, right now in the summer of 2011 is, what does it mean that the country that elected Barack Obama might just turn around and elect Michelle Bachmann?
Yeah.
What does that kind of doubleness of this historical moment is I think, really distinctive.
Well, Huffington Post, actually, when she announced her candidacy, our headline was "Fired Up and Ready to Go." And so the sense of exhilaration and possibility that surrounded both candidacies, she may disappear next week. But I'm trying to think of the field. There's no one who really has a sense of possibility like she does. Sarah had it last time, but I don't know. I have a hard time understanding it, but there are a lot of people who feel totally alienated from their country. And that's the way that many people whom I know felt during the Bush years. Completely alienated from what was going on. Felt like the country was totally off track. Couldn't understand what was going on. And then the possibility of having a new era with Barack Obama was exhilarating.
Mm-hmm. Can you narrate your own experience of these years? Starting with maybe the run-up to the Obama election.
Yeah, well, I can...
and then, the various vicissitudes of
experience sure.
in the years since he's been in office.
Well, first of all, I should say that my partner and I were a divided household. He was a strong Hillary supporter, and I was a vote. You may not be interested in this history, but this was we had our biggest fight over Hillary and Obama. Biggest fight, fuck you. Which is nuts. But, and part of that for me is I was a Barack Obama supporter. And he's 12 years older than me. And part of it was, what it was for me is that I didn't want to relive the 60s. And I felt like electing a Clinton was just going to keep us there. And it was just going to be Clinton, Bush, and crony. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to do that. He didn't believe in it. It's funny to think of right now. Like, and I'm sure this is going on in Republican households. Like, what do you mean? You know what I mean? But the difference between Hillary, policy-wise, was probably less than most of these candidates. But anyway, it was rough. We got through it. But I was so excited about Barack Obama, and I guess what was it? It was the possibility. It was the what. Could we really live into this incredibly challenging moment, both on the domestic front and the international front? Could we find a way to diffuse the incredible antagonism going on in the international scene? Could we actually bring justice to this American system, which seems like it's so tilted towards the rich? And that all seemed like if we did it, if we could do it, that we possibly could do it, because there were so many of us, and we could do it. We could actually, it really felt, without trying not to be naive. But feeling that there was so much goodwill and so much willingness to work that we could probably do it. Mm-hmm. We could at least move closer. And it was very interesting. I remember I wrote a piece at the inauguration about kind of the subdued tone of his acceptance. Mm-hmm. Of that day. Because it wasn't soaring rhetoric. He immediately became very practical, very sort of like hard work. Let's put away foolish things, which almost felt like not just the Republicans, but let's not and that has indeed been the case. He had extraordinary challenges to deal with, but there's two things I'll say. He accomplished a lot for gay people, and I don't think gay people are giving him any credit. Now, you could say that, he didn't do it. Yeah, he did. Somehow it happened under his watch, and he played it right. And so the people, Rachel Maddow is saying, like, the day of New York equality passed, Barack Obama didn't want this to happen. It's bullshit. This was a good time. He managed to work this well, and we're don't ask, don't tell was a major thing. So there were he passed a healthcare bill, which seemed impossible, and that was an exhilarating day. But he's been very matter of fact, and it's hard to get that sense of excitement, and I haven't felt called upon in some ways to get excited. Mm-hmm. I think that was where it kind of fell apart, is that there were a lot of people who were interested who just had no outlet for this interest, and so a lot of people, and then the reality of unemployment and the reality of all this shit came up, and things, things are not good for a lot of people. And so I've played a game at most family gatherings where it's like Rate the President we play. And in my family, which is all Democratic, our Democrat, we people range from 2 to 9. But there you have it. I mean, it's. I think he's really smart, and I think he's really good. I just, I'm sick of the wars. I'm sick of, I'm sick of the, I feel like I want him to be a little bit more aggressive. Mm-hmm. But it was very funny. Like my cousin, who was a Barack Obama supporter, who was a hedge fund manager on the Brandeis side, she was like, we were at a family dinner where we had this like really, it was great because it was very old school for our family, like serious argument and debate about, and unfortunately she's the one who's like, we're all picking on because she's the, representing the most conservative element. And she said, oh, all my friends are saying, well, what did you expect when you were supporting him? Of course he was going to do this. And I was like, what? And he was like, she was saying, yeah, I mean, of course he was going to be more liberal than we thought. And I was like, what? That's what your friends are saying? Because you got a reality check, honey. Because everyone on the other side is saying the same thing. I mean, that he's become so conservative. So in case you're wondering. And I think that that's often the role he's playing is like he's kind of in the middle he is trying to be the adult in the room.
Right.
That's not no one likes the adult in the room.
Well, it's also such a low bar to set for our national leaders.
Well, it's true. Well, it's a low bar, but it's only a low bar if everybody else in the room is such a child.
Mm-hmm. Which happens to be the case. And so maybe that is, unfortunately, like, look at this debt crisis thing. This is crazy what's happening. And Minnesota has taught us this can happen. We could not reach a compromise. We could close down or whatever. I don't know what will happen. But anyway, I'm still, I still believe that he's, I still believe that he's intelligent, well-intentioned, and I just, I'm not sure how much what he seemed to have lost. And then you hear him speak, and he's really still a good speaker, but he's lost the inspiration and the sense of invitation, or has kind of checked it at the door.
But I think what he really lost, which was a political miscalculation, was the invitation to those of his supporters to really continue being on board. They tried to do this, organizing Barack Obama or something like that, but it wasn't, and so it wasn't, never got, it felt like it, it was purely an election.
Right.
Rather than the sense of it was that it was a monumental moment. Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of became an election of a president who had to do his job, which is maybe just we all had to grow up. Mm-hmm. But
there are two things that I think really capture in their way the texture of the moment and its polarities and its kind of fraughtness, and you happen to have a personal connection to both of them. One is what happened in Wisconsin over the summer, I don't know, or over the winter. I don't know if you still have close connections or personal
my
ties
sister lives
in
like 2 blocks from the cat.
So that's one of them, and then the other is what both Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the gay rights, gay marriage issue, and how that has played out for the better in some ways, for the worse in other ways, but very complex kind of moment. I was wondering if you could reflect a minute on those two things and kind of how you think about them in general, but also how you think about what they have to say about kind of where we are right now as a society.
Well, I mean, 2 years after Barack Obama was elected, the Democrats sat it out. I had a huge, not huge, but I kind of took my sister to task. I said, so what did you do in the last election? Because, I was in New Jersey, and our congressman, who is amazing, Rush Holt, has had a serious, race and could have easily lost. And so I was working, I was really working on the campaign. I said, so what did you do in the last election when Russ Feingold got defeated? How much did you do? And she was like, well, I voted. And I was like, who cares? It was like, you sat it out. You and all your friends sat it out, and you let this happen. And, and now you don't cry to me. This is what happens when you sit it out. And so, I was really like, and she was just like, she later was just like, you're absolutely right. But there were a lot of people up there protesting on it. It was just like, if you had spent any of that energy on the election, we wouldn't be here. But the idea that Wisconsin, and my family was involved in some of that. The question of, my grandmother in particular was involved in union rights and organizing, and so that Wisconsin can take away those rights. It's really a shocking thing, and that it can happen so quickly. That many years of security can be just taken away so quickly. It's a really, shocking thing. I'll say, on the other thing, like I don't want to say it was intentional because it probably wasn't, but I was talking to a friend of mine who was kind of a heavy hitter in the Clinton White House, and I was talking to him before the midterm election. I said, "So is Barack Obama going to be reelected?" He said, "Well, if Democrats lose the House, it's more likely." And I, I see what they're saying. It's like they're saying if you have all the advantages and things are still fucked, if you have all the branches and things are still screwed up, then you're easily blamed. But now it's going to be shared responsibility. So, so I don't know. I mean, it seems like where was the president in all of that? He didn't show up to Wisconsin,
right?
That's a political calculation that the unions aren't strong, and that people don't care about unions, and the rhetoric that unions are, that they're past their usefulness is working on the American people, and that it's the unions that are to blame for So anyway, it was a very rough moment, and it'll be interesting to see how the recall efforts go, because there was a lot of energy around that, and I think there's a lot of energy. I was maybe for the next election, and kind of morphing into your other question, Tammy Baldwin, who was in my sister's class at West at my high school, and was a student of my father's at the law school. Who's a lesbian, a congresswoman from Madison, is running for Senate. And that could be awesome, because she's a wonderful progressive candidate who could win, because she's super convincing. She's really strong. So wouldn't that be wonderful? And, don't ask, don't tell. I think the strategy was exactly right there. Make the Congress do it. Mm-hmm. It was a risk, but now it's that's done. And that was so important. It was so important in the context of the connecting that with the bullying debate, which was happening at the same time. And it's like more and more. There's just there's going to be no place for it. Just kind of this hatred of gay people. And a sense of entitlement that you can either attack them, or you can discriminate against people. It's like it's not going to be acceptable to do that. So that was major, and the fact that I think what was it? Obama said they're not going to defend Dilma. Mm-hmm. That's that's a pretty powerful thing to say, and so I'm actually very I'm thankful for the president because it's not easy. I mean, remember, Clinton signed DOMA. You know, so if anybody's holding up the Clintons, don't.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, he caved completely. Now, maybe Obama had other calculus, but at least he didn't do that. You know, it was a different time, you know, all et cetera, but that's really a big problem. And now you see all these, like, you know, marriage amendments that keep going. But fortunately, I just see, like, the writing's on the wall on all of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, you know, one of the things that you could take as evidence of that is that it was the Republican Assembly in Albany that passed
But the other thing I take from it is that among young gay evangelicals, homosexuality is not the issue. Either they're explicitly pro-gay, or they just don't want to fight that. They're not interested. They have too many gay friends. They know too many gay people. It's just not going to be their issue. They're not going to have the same vehemence around this than that their parents did. Now, where you're seeing it big time, on the other hand, is abortion. Because they have even more vehemence about that. Because they've never lived in a time when people were dying because of botched abortions. They've never seen the desperation of a woman who wants to not have a child. And what happens? You know, it's a very luxurious position to be in. You can be righteous without having any consequence. You know, I mean, okay, I'm pro-life, you know, and I'm going to get rid of all abortion. What are you going to do, you know, when people start dying because of illegal abortions? You know, I mean, and have no choice in this matter anymore. And are you going to pay for all those kids? You know, I mean, all those questions that are not, and they're not going to pay for it because they don't believe in that. You know what I mean? So we're going to have just a lot more poor people. You know what I mean? It's a lot of consequence that they have the luxury right now because they don't really believe they're ever going to win. When they win, it's going to be really hard, and I think they will.
You think they will win?
I think abortion is going to become significantly harder to have.
It already has.
Yeah, it already has, but I think it's going to get much more everywhere. Maybe not in New York or Massachusetts. Maybe not, but maybe. You know what I mean? Like, it's... you know, this is that... And part of that is, you know, I think there has been a complete lack of engagement of religious communities on this. I mean, there are organizations, but I haven't read actually, you know, I mean, a convincing theological reason for this for a while. You know, that for choice. You know, I mean, it's, you know, Bev Harrison did one a long time ago, and it just, someone needs to do it because they've lost the moral high ground on this, you know, or because it's so easy to have the other one. It's such an easy thing, right. You know, it's a beating heart.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's very hard, you know, you have to come up with something else. Otherwise, it's just a self-indulgent woman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I've heard the argument that what we're really living in, I mean, what we, you know, when we talk about the polarization of our political life, it's usually kind of talked about as kind of post-Gingrich Revolution, kind of post-mid-90s phenomenon of just the utter intransigence of the positions and the impossibility of any kind of compromise or meaningful conversation across the aisle. I've heard the argument that all of that, what we're really living in, is kind of a post-Roe v. Wade moment, where it was really the issue of abortion that made it possible to see our adversaries not just as people who disagree with us, but as actually evil. Yeah. And that has kind of tainted our political culture in a more general way, and we're now kind of reaping the whirlwind of that. What do you think of that argument?
Well, I guess I'm not as much of a historian, but, you know, it seems like humanity is always capable of viewing our adversaries as evil. I mean, Civil War, you know, or name your thing. So I don't know that you can point to anything and say this is it for this moment. I don't know if our rhetoric is worse than it was. I mean, I think it just, the Riverside Church was one of the most contentious places I've ever worked, with a lot of different warring factions. It's a small microcosm, but then when I learned that there were times in the 50s when they had to call the police because there were fist fights at the annual meeting, and then you kind of think, oh, well, we didn't have that this year. We had everything else, but we didn't have to call the police. So I hate to kind of
thing.
yeah. This is this is like the Peace and Justice Church. So I it's hard for me to kind of compare it to other times. I do. It's hard for me not to slip into it. Mm-hmm. And so. I don't know. I can't say with an objective mind. Oh, mm-hmm. Why are they doing this? Because it's very easy for me to get into that, because I don't know why. I mean, there's all these theories about how we get media, and how we can all that stuff. Why does it seem like the stakes are so high? I don't know. Why does it seem that? And why do we have this sense of disaster if we lose on one thing? Because it's never, it always swings. So it's, I'm not sure why we feel that way. But it's certainly, sometimes I find myself just tensing up and being so angry. And I guess maybe it's I don't know, maybe I'm being too clever, but the kind of dawning that I just have a different worldview, and that we're just completely seeing things completely differently. And it's kind of a very sort of moving from a modern to a postmodern approach to the world, where I actually have a hard time seeing anything you're seeing. Mm-hmm. And, what does it mean for me what does it mean for me and Michelle Bachmann to both call ourselves American? And to feel very committed to this country, mm-hmm. and feel and feel religiously engaged in the well-being of this country, and because if I'm honest, I have some sort of American exceptionalism myself. I do love this country in a very, very deep, particular way. I think it's a very, unique country, and so. And yet, for us to come to totally different understandings of what that means, mm-hmm. and be both Christians and Protestant Christians, and go down the line. I mean, we have a lot of ways that we're white, we're essentially affluent.
From the Midwest, even.
We're from the Midwest. We talk funny, but it's so. What holds us together anymore?
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the media. I mean, that is one of the things that people have pointed to, is the kind of fragmentation of media. When you have 3 networks, you get one kind of public debate, and when you have 150 or 500 channels, and they're all kind of their boutique, kind of niched approaches to the news
or the web.
I mean, everyone has their own personal data set. So it's not as though we have a disagreement over a common data set. We have our own data sets, and it's becoming harder and harder to bridge.
Yeah. I'm not sure. How you do that, but what so I don't, I feel very, and I feel like how, because my family, my family is also like so strongly one party that I don't really interact with people who disagree with me that much, and so which I don't think is as common. I mean, I think there's other people who have families who are more like heterogeneous, and that's probably healthy, if more difficult. So I don't know. I don't know. One of the things that was very helpful for me at Princeton was I was in a very small community, relatively, and I was working with a lot of students who had political views I didn't agree with, and yet I had to be in service of them, and so I could see their humanity. I could see that there were reasons behind what they were believing, and that was very helpful, because sometimes now when I'm really angry, I think, okay, no, I know some people who are like that. You know what I mean? Like they're not, they're. But this problem of completely different worldviews is also a global problem. You know what I mean? Like, people have we can think Americans generally think of ourselves as a good country, and yet so many people in the world just think what we do is evil, evil, evil. And so if that's where I'm like, Michelle and I would be like, what do you mean? We'd probably all of a sudden go, once they started talking, we'd realize that, oh yeah, well, I agree with you on that point. And Michelle would be like, oh no, but I do, I think that there's such a disconnect on that level too. But what's going to be fascinating is, and I'm not looking forward to it, because I get so invested in political campaigns. I just I lose sleep over it. Like I can't. So Brad likes to watch TV right before we go to bed, and I'm like, no, because I won't be able to sleep. These debates. But I am fascinated to see how this very different perspectives play out in debates, and how we understand, how we listen to each other, how we understand one another. And I'm interested to see if Barack Obama also represents my viewpoint still. I don't, hopefully, it'll be interesting to hear how he campaigns. He's a very good campaigner, or was, So I don't know about this moment in history.
You sound. There's a thread of optimism that comes through everything you've said, I think.
I'm essentially a hopeful person. I feel like, for instance, I see the reaction to 9/11 as essentially positive. Now, there's a fraction of our country that's freaking out. But Muslims have stepped into the mainstream. They've been forced to look at themselves in the mirror. In America, and they're very involved in interfaith activities, and so all of that is good. In some ways, we have a long ways to go, but I think that there's, when I got to Princeton, I was the Muslim liaison, and then Princeton took it upon themselves to hire a Muslim chaplain and to hire a Hindu chaplain, because we recognized we have to do something about this. We have to recognize that there are Muslims in the world, and there are Hindus in the world, and they're going to come to Princeton, and they should be incorporated into the wider religious life. And that's progress, I am essentially hopeful. I'm hopeful. I still believe that Obama is the best president of my lifetime. I think he's the guy I'd most want to talk to, of any of them. Clinton's interesting, but and Jimmy Carter I love, but I think Barack Obama is even more of a nuanced thinker than any of them. I think it's really, really interesting, and I'm okay with America declining a little bit in world power. I would much rather have us be thought of as a cultural, and the best of American culture: rock and roll, jazz, theater, dance. We have a lot to offer, But I'm so ready for our military to be just seriously gutted. So that's where I think that I need to figure out why have I not been active enough on that front, but essentially I am hopeful. I think he's going to win a second term. I think it'll be a good term. It'll be interesting to see. But there's going to be a lot of nervousness before then. And also remember, 2 weeks ago I was given the right to marry. I do for me, MLK's great contribution is the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's a theological statement, and it's a justice statement. It says that progress will happen. We will move forward. As Tony Kushner says, the world only moves forward. And you look at Wisconsin. I think that's a setback, but I think that it all of a sudden woke Wisconsin up a little bit.
In a certain way, at least for a minute there in the winter, it looked like it was ironically just a huge gift to the left to have to take that kind of extreme stance.
And it's happened everywhere. And I think that it's I think people are, kind of. But anyway, I mean, so if I'm hopeful, it's also because I've recently seen something very good happen. And sometimes I have theological arguments with Christians when they want to talk about sin, and that the world is always going to be evil. There's no way to redeem this world. There's no well, it's kind of easy for you to say, but look where mentally look where people with mental illness were 100 years ago, where they are today. There's a totally different understanding of what it's all about, and a respect and an opportunity for treatment. Look where women were. We have 2 women running for president who have Sarah Palin isn't yet, but she will. Look where gay people are. For better or for worse, look where black folks are. There's a lot of things that are. You can't tell me that something good hasn't been able to happen, because I'm living proof of it. The idea that I could somehow be a religious leader, it's crazy. And so yeah, I'm essentially hopeful, but that's also a theological stance. I don't know if it's good. Hopefully, I don't. What's the point of not being, really?
I guess at the end of the day,
what? There's a place for cynicism, but I don't think that's a political platform.
Right. I guess I'd say I aspire to be hopeful.
You can do it. You can be it. Just come to the light. Yeah. And I. I think, minds have been changed around gay people at an incredibly rapid pace.
Mm-hmm.
Minds can be changed about the poor. We haven't figured out how to do it. There was a time when that was America decided we have to take care of everybody. That was the New Deal. And we have to figure out how to have that sort of rhetoric where it's no longer, where we just don't accept the idea that it's all about pulling yourself up from the bootstraps and all of that stuff. Like, we have to figure out how America again just decides to care for its poor, and that seems like doable. So,
is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should have, or anything that you haven't said that you wish you had?
This present moment. I guess the only thing that I think is important, kind of from a historical point, is that I don't think things have ever happened faster. Meaning, and when it takes a lot of time to affect change. But at the same time, things happen so fast. I mean, like right now, like today, I could publish something that could potentially cause a riot. In Afghanistan, like that pastor did. I could go into my office right now and publish something, and they could erase it within 5 minutes, but it would still be out there. So, and the power that we have to make horrible things happen quickly. It's harder to make good things happen.
I was going to say, why does it take longer to...
It does. I can, because it's much harder to make people love than it is to hate. It's easy to make people hate. Really, it's much harder to make people love. And that's, and so that's...
Well, so what's your theological understanding of that?
Theological understanding of that? I wish I had a theology of that. What is my theological take on that? It's like a cautionary tale. I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in the crucify. It's much harder to stand there and, defend. But if we look towards our heroes, they're always the ones who pronounce love. Mm-hmm. If you look at anybody's heroes, they always talked about love. And so, I don't know why we don't listen to them more, but it is. That's no one is beatified. No one is lifted up as a role model because they taught people to distrust more. That's not a value, even if it's what we are more prone towards. Mm-hmm. And so that is, and I think that when you think back to what was promised with Obama, was that we were going to find this way to reach across.
Right.
That was really promised. Maybe that was the problem. It was promised, but we never learned how to do it. Mm-hmm. We never learned how to actually do it. And in our communities, small communities, but also like what the implications of that would be, or what the mechanisms of that would be. So maybe that's the project. And a lot of people have tried to do this civility, we talk about civility. But yeah, I think that, this is such a huge topic, and I'm meandering a little bit, but interesting to think about. Is there any question that you had that you went into kind of thinking that I might have a final answer on?
No, I never expect a final answer. No, but thank you. I really appreciate this. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been fun to talk about. And I'd love to see, like, kind of, anytime you do, if you write about this or anything like that, this wider project, I'd be very interested. It seems like, it might be of great interest to people.
I hope so. I'll turn this off.